So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this is an important development as well. So I mentioned before at the start of this show that there's been some interesting developments, and we talked about last time that some of the Epstein victims were at Washington, and with Thomas Massie support, it seemed, or it might have been a different event that was. I know there's been a bit of thing over that. With the Epstein victims saying that they were going to come up with their own list, basically. Something which I didn't really anticipate at the time, or didn't really see until some of the conservative commentators had said at the time, was that, you know, why didn't they just say the names there and then? Obviously, the potential for that is that they could get their asses sued if there's people in there that haven't been named yet or whatever, for whatever reason. Obviously, a lot of people simply can't take that risk. So I hope, whether it's, you know, some people have been saying people like Thomas Massie are just picking this up now as a political issue to get at Trump, right? Because he's fumbled it so much. But at the end of the day, why the fuck did they fumble it so much, right? You know, the complicity of Pam Bondi and potentially even Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. Point being, ladies and gentlemen, with regards to this now, an OMG undercover journalist has caught on camera, right, an admission, an interesting admission indeed, from somebody by the name of Joseph Schnitt, who is acting deputy chief at the Office of Enforcement Operations at America's Department of Justice. And he's been on there saying, been on the record saying that A, the Epstein files do indeed exist. B, that the DOJ will likely redact every Republican that's on the list and leave all the liberal Democrat candidates on the list to use as a political tool. And then even C, potentially they are trying to give benefits to Ghislaine Maxwell, or Ghislaine Maxwell, I'm not really sure how you say it because I've seen people say it different ways, by moving her to a minimum security prison in violation of what usually happens to convicted sex offenders. Normally that's barred from them. So it seems as though they're trying to give her some benefits of some kind in order to get her to keep her mouth shut, it seems. The DOJ has been back at James O'Keefe with a statement, but then, as you see, tried to say that he, you know, from Joseph Schnitt in particular, saying that he basically didn't say what he said, never gave his role out, but James has been quite clear and literally highlights on there that he says what his role is. He says, you know, what he's involved in and that kind of stuff. This is very, very interesting. And we're also going to go over an interesting video as well in a moment, ladies and gentlemen, of someone explaining that the missing minute fiasco was far bigger than what we thought it was. And it could definitely be hiding a lot and potentially could confirm a lot of the suspicions that people have, right? Here is part of that video. This is in a couple of parts, so we'll go through this step by step, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the first part of the video from OMG Media.
Those files do exist.
Yeah, thousands and thousands of pages of files. They'll redact every Republican or conservative person in those files, leave all the liberal Democratic people in those files.
I would think because you did that Maxwell person.
Yeah.
And also about
Got transferred to a minimum security prison too recently, which is against BOP policy because she's a convicted sex offender. They're offering her something to keep the mouth shut.
That was the acting deputy chief of the Office of Enforcement Operations, Joseph Schnitt, telling a stranger about the FBI and DOJ's handling of the Epstein files. Schnitt, who works at a high level inside the Department of Justice, goes on to comment on the inconsistent statements, special treatment of Ghislaine Maxwell, and the blatant backtracking on promises of transparency.
what do you do for work?
Or for the Department of Justice.
Okay.
And they're like 23. I'm an analyst.
Not
I'll be acting deputy chief of our office for a few months starting next week. I work closely with like all the federal law enforcement agencies and the U.S. attorney's offices, the prosecutors and stuff. So the thing is, it's interesting because I do deal with so many of the agencies, like the Bureau of Prisons, the Marshal Service, the FBI, the U.S. attorney's offices.
It's nice.
Recently, the FBI...
So, before we go with that, ladies and gentlemen, so you can see that he clearly outlined who he is and what he does, who he works with, etc., etc. So this is a statement from the DOJ posted this, the U.S. Department of Justice posted this on X, right? And for 6.3 million views, it is really not being received very well, seemingly. It's only got about 4,000 likes. It's got it got about 1.4 thousand comments, and combining those with reposts and quotes, which, from at least from what I've seen, don't exactly seem to be the most positive. You know what I mean? People are not buying so much the narrative anymore, the establishment narrative. But according to Joseph Schnitt, because this is his statement, it's coming from acting director Pollock, but it's signed by him, but signed by Schnitt. I met a woman named Skylar on Hinge, a dating app, in July 2025. Her profile is no longer findable. We had 2 dates, August 4th and August 16th. She claimed to be an au pair in Georgetown. She gave no clues that she was a reporter or recording our dates. You know, that kind of give the game away, wouldn't it? Had I a clue, the first date would have been ended immediately and there never would have been a second one. Yeah, that's why, ladies and gentlemen, these undercover reporting is so effective, because you catch them in scenarios where they wouldn't be saying what they usually say. That's why the O'Keefe media team is so effective, seemingly, and why it seems at the moment they're trying to wage so much lawfare against the undercover reporters, because they don't like this stuff coming out. He was very effective, for example, in exposing that one of Prince Andrew's confidant, or somebody that was close to Prince Andrew, saying that he was on camera saying that Prince Andrew was doing horrible things to kids, right? Or saying horrible things to young girls, right? He was on camera saying that he did it. You wouldn't know that because this guy's in a situation where he feels safe, feels able to open up with people that he feels are not going to say anything because maybe they're all on it together. Who knows? I have no idea who else was in this meeting, by the way. But again, that's why this is so important. You catch them in a scenario where they have no reason to lie. They have no reason to lie, seemingly. Again, a bit weird for you to be giving all this stuff out on a first and second date, though, saying that they're going to do all these things with the Epstein files, and the Epstein files do exist on a first and second date. You know, but anyway, it shows that the people in the government, you know, humans, we're not infallible. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, you shouldn't necessarily be that really scared of the state, even if you look at all the stuff we just went over with Angela Rayner and all the other guys, right? You have no reason to fear these people with their own. These guys are not overlords in how competent they are and stuff like that. They're propped up by a system that is effective, right? They're propped up by a system that is effective and a system that is ruthless, but these guys are just as incompetent as anyone else. So don't let yourself get into the thought process of thinking that these guys are like supremely smart or anything like that. For the most part, you might get a few geniuses here and there, right? Yeah, and usually those people then, when their morals kick in, they end up becoming whistleblowers and stuff like that. Not always, but usually. My profile indicated that I did government work, but I did not specify for which agency. I never discussed what I do at the DOJ. The comments I made were my own personal comments on what I've learned in the media and not from anything I've done at or learned via work. I have no knowledge of the circumstances surrounding Miss Maxwell other than what is reported in the news. I also never divulged anything about what I do at work. I recall that she asked if I had any knowledge about Maxwell, and I specifically said I only know what's been reported in the media. Now we've got more footage to go through, ladies and gentlemen. Just remember, though, this guy said, where is it to, that it's against BOP policy. She got transferred to a minimum security prison, which is against BOP policy because she's a convicted sex offender. He said that he's been there at the Department of Justice for 23 years, right? As an analyst, he says that he's an analyst and he works closely as an active deputy chief for our office a few months starting next week. So he's going to be the acting deputy chief, and he works closely with all the federal law enforcement agencies and the U.S. attorney's offices, the prosecutors, and stuff like that. I do so many of the agencies like the Bureau of Prisons, the Marshal Service, the FBI, the U.S. attorney's offices. He's outright open about it. So we can already see that this person, this is trying to cover for his own back, right? Because he's been snooped. He's been caught, basically. But it does not end there, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get into elaborating on more of what Mr. Schnitt said.
For promising transparency, then refusing to release footage and unredacted documents, going directly against the public's expectations and the promises made by Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel. In a DOJ press release, Attorney General Pam Bondi stated, quote, "This Department of Justice is following through on President Trump's commitment to transparency and lifting the veil on the disgusting actions of Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirators, unquote, and also claimed they were shedding light on Epstein's extensive network, only to later claim that Epstein was acting alone, and that the only video evidence they had was of Epstein's personal child porn collection.
Also, to the tens of thousands of video, they turned out to be child porn downloaded by that disgusting Jeffrey Epstein. Child porn is what they were.
In the same process.
Again, so highlighting a lot of the lies on the part of the establishment there, for example, which is only going to get worse when we hear what Mr. Schnitt had to say about what they plan to do with said Epstein files. Skip through to that in a moment. But again, there's so many contradictions. Just shows that the people who had suspicions about how the government were going to handle this were completely right. And that makes you think, what the hell is going on? Why won't they be, not necessarily even saying open and transparent about everything, but the names? Because who are they going to implicate? So who are the government protecting, right? And then why? And then why? And is the narrative around Jeffrey Epstein with regards to who the government says he actually is, that he's just this creep who was good with cameras or whatever, this disgusting child predator creep, was he actually who he said he was, or was he working on behalf of other agencies? Again, nobody ever asked. This biggest thing with Bondi, nobody ever asked to see the videos of the atrocious acts that happened. Nobody ever asked to see photos or anything like that. Nobody ever asked to see any of this stuff of the acts taking place. People want to know who was there. People want to know who was there and who was in the videos doing the horrible things to young girls. That's what people know. They just want names. It's the fact that you guys aren't coming out with names that's ruining your credibility. And rightfully so. And rightfully so. So you're skipping forward more of the footage. He goes through in the video about how Kash Patel saying one thing on Fox News and then saying another thing when he went on the Joe Rogan Experience. Right. Here's the next bit of Schnitt, however, talking about the internal conflict at the DOJ, and again making us full of confidence about the state of the officials being responsible for justice in our supposedly free and morally upright countries.
Internally, there's a lot of, even within the administration, there's internal conflict.
Okay.
Like the head of FBI really wants it. Second in command at FBI has been causing problems because he's like, no, these have to be released.
Yeah. So the FBI wants him out.
Yep, the top two guys gotta do it. Yeah.
And Bonnie doesn't.
I don't know what that is. Bonnie wants whatever child.
Why is there such...
So, a lot of information there in very few brief sentences, ladies and gentlemen. So he said there, one thing that I want to know, and he says that this is a bit weird. The FBI, the head of the FBI, so that would be Kash Patel, wants to, and the second in command at the FBI, Bongino, has been causing problems because he also wants to. Now, that seems a little bit thing to me because of how Kash Patel has changed and the seemingly under duress interview that Bongino gave when he said that, look, I've seen the files, Epstein killed himself, and went back on everything that he'd been saying on his podcast for years, right? Now, he's the one seeming to be pushing for the Epstein files to be released. And the only way I can see him causing problems is if he's running up against Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, or maybe it's him and Kash Patel running up against Pam Bondi, right? And if Trump potentially is covering for whether it be foreign governments or covering for people within his own administration, right? And covering for what he may see as the state of the entire government, the governance of the United States and the world as a whole, right? Because this has the potential to bring down many governments, royal families even, right? So is he seeing that he's doing things protecting those people, and that's why he's objecting to it? And then Bondi's just following his lead because, as he said, she's just a yes man, yes person, yes lady, whatever. So that's what I'm seeing. It again just speaks to the whole thing where we said the web of corruption, and it just seemed that it's not just in the UK government, for example, with the exit of Angela Rayner and others that have been doing the exact opposite of what they're supposed to do. We are wondering now, is have the dominoes begun falling, have the chips begun coming down on all of these people to the point where they can't keep this under wraps anymore? People can't keep, as they say, loose lips sink ships, as they say, loose lips sink ships. But it does seem as though there's a lot of forces behind the scenes that don't want these things to be released, obviously, right? But again, just it does seem that people were right, seemingly, to have little faith in the establishment and in the government, seemingly. But I suppose, again, it's only through the work of people like James O'Keefe that are truly holding their feet to the fire, holding the government's feet to the fire, right? That's actually bringing about the change that people want. Because it seems though that if he's to be believed here, right, where he's saying if we'll get the Epstein files at all, that they plan to use it as a political tool. If what Joseph Schmidt is saying here, Joseph Schnitt, sorry, is saying is correct, they plan, rather sadly, to use the Epstein victims and the whole case or whatever as a political tool to get at their political opponents and leave potentially disgusting child predators and child rapists on their own side to go scot-free purely for the political benefits.
Do you think like the stuff with Epstein will actually get released or not at all?
If it does, it'll be heavily redacted, and his name won't be in it.
But those files do exist.
There's files.
Yeah.
For sure. There's, thousands and thousands of pages of files. But again, if they're released in any way, it's going to be very redacted. They'll redact every Republican or conservative person in those files, leave all the liberal Democratic people in those files, and have a very slanted version of it come out where it's like, look at what these are, without releasing any of their bad behavior.
This is James O'Keefe.
So that will not make people happy, because ultimately what people care about is justice. And no matter what political allegiance the people may be beholden to or whatever, they want to know that justice has been done. That's what they want to know. They want to know that justice has been done. And that seems as though it's not going to be done. All right. And it's really, really sad, because we've seen what happens when justice is deprived of things like the grooming gangs in the UK, for example, and people have used that as a political football to no end. Nigel Farage and Reform used it as a political football, despite seeming that they were going to do nothing about it right from the get-go, and knowing they were going to do nothing about it, using the victims and their cases as a political football to gain political clout by saying that he was going to fund a private inquiry and never did so, right? And that when Rupert Lowe launched his inquiry, that he got support from other members of the House, but yet Nigel Farage and all of the Reform guys are conveniently absent from supporting somebody who they may not get along with, right? Somebody who dare defend the dear leader's ego, right? Yet he was the one that went on to actually fund it and actually seems to be doing some good work with trying to get justice for the victims now. As we know, they've been doing seemingly a lot of good work. The list of 85 constituencies that were exposed as having covered up systematic child abuse, right? Been complicit in it. But this is the thing where it does seem now, ladies and gentlemen, in order to, again, further politicize this and further to stop things from being negatively skewed onto them, despite the fact that might be what needs to happen in order for justice to happen. We don't care at this point if it ends up collapsing fucking political systems. A lot of us want our political systems to collapse because we don't like the current political system that we're in. Don't like living in a world where governments cover for each other despite doing heinous crimes against young girls. Right, and then the powerful get to go away with it and get away with it. The rich and powerful get away with it. But then, if you were to do even something remotely close to that, if you were to even criticize a leader, criticize a president, or criticize a prime minister, or criticize anything, try and highlight the truth about systematic grooming gangs, for example, you end up going to prison simply because of your socioeconomic status. A lot of the time, the fact that you can't defend yourself in the same way and you can't get off scot-free with these things. No, a lot of us are sick and tired for it, because then the same people that get off scot-free with these heinous crimes will say that, oh yeah, well, all of us are, nobody is above the law and stuff like that. No, go fuck yourselves. That's not the case whatsoever. Says a lot then when they apparently go to visit Ghislaine Maxwell and are now moving her to a minimum security prison in violation of BOP policy, seemingly to give her these benefits and keep her quiet. It's the last part of the video now, ladies and gentlemen. This is very interesting indeed.
You visited that Maxwell person?
Yeah.
And also about?
Got transferred to a minimum security prison too recently, which is against BOP policy because she's a convicted sex offender, and they're not supposed to get minimum security prisons, which is an interesting detail because she's getting a benefit, which means they're offering her something to keep it on shut.
The difference between a low security prison and a minimum security prison is that minimum security prisons are designed for non-violent offenders with short sentences. They often have no perimeter fencing, and inmates are housed in dormitory-style rooms. We looked into the Bureau of Prisons policies, and Schnitt's claim is in fact correct. Convicted sex offenders are historically ineligible for minimum security facilities.
So just to read you it on screen, ladies and gentlemen, I'll bring it back up on the full screen in a moment. This is where it says, so this is from the U.S. Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Prisons, change notice, inmate security designation and custody classification. So a sex offender, a male or female inmate whose behavior in the current term of confinement or prior history includes one or more of the following elements will be housed in at least a low security level institution. So basically say minimum security, which is what you saw on the other side. So when you saw these dormitory rooms, as you can see here, he lays them out really well. The minimum security here on the right, much more like a university dormitory, not quite as, luxurious, if you will, in many instances, but just a very small room, but a bed, a sink, some amenities and stuff like that. You can even have decorations on the wall. A low security is a prison bunk with a single desk, bars on the windows, and usually no perimeter fencing in the minimum security versus low security. You do, in fact, have a perimeter fence. So, again, breaking policy to give a convicted sex offender, which bear in mind, again, sex offending or sex trafficking to no one. Let's bear that in mind, sex trafficking to no one. So there are no clients or whatever, as the DOJ have claimed. Well, surely she should be free, because how can she sex traffic if there's nobody to sex traffic to, right? But again, this is just where corruption seems to have no end, ladies and gentlemen. So bring it forward again now. Bring it forward
Are
again.
historically ineligible for minimum security facilities. Schnitt is also very credible by virtue of where he works inside the Department of Justice. This raises significant questions about why Ghislaine Maxwell was provided such special treatment at a time where the DOJ and the FBI are under heavy scrutiny for their handling of the Epstein files. The DOJ and FBI have continually promised transparency to the country. Why was the case's most significant witness transferred to a more comfortable prison life, all while Epstein's victims were still not receiving the justice they deserve? Why does it take a random girl in Washington, D.C. for someone like Joseph Schnitt to open up? Why are top DOJ officials spilling all these secrets in restaurants, while the American people are not necessarily afforded the same transparency that they're promised? It doesn't.
Yep. It doesn't make any sense, indeed. But again, you can't have a government that is 100% transparent, because obviously they had to keep certain things secret because they're dealing on a geopolitical stage, right? Foreign governments are watching everything that other government does. If they say something in the media, the foreign government is going to be all over it as potential information, right? They have to keep things under wraps for national security and stuff like that. Admittedly, yes. But you have to do that. The only way you can give them the benefit of the doubt on that is if you understand that they're morally upright and good people that have your interests at heart with the weight of the position that they're in. And we're seeing that with many governments, many government officials across the world, that not only are they incompetent, but in many instances they've turned evil and actually turned against their people. And that's why so many people are in many ways in open rebellion, seemingly at the moment against the state. Not in many ways violent yet, but it could be potentially in the future. Obviously, we did cover that there was in fact a violent outbreak that broke out between the National Socialist Network and Antifa in Australia. Can we hope that isn't the side of things to come? Because ultimately, the division between the two sides, division between people in the communities, only benefits the people that seek to control, right? United we stand, divided we fall, right? That's the way it is. But ultimately, if we are divided between left and right, it's only going to benefit seemingly the people who are in current control of our politicians, because the only way we can ensure that we don't change the system, at least with the democratic means that we still currently have, which are rapidly being eroded, is by remaining divided. And that's why they're trying to divide us on all different lines, right? The feminism was the most destructive thing in this instance because it divided the bedrock institution of society, that being the family, right? But again, people are divided along what lines of oppression they have through the trans and gender ideology. People are divided between, as I said, men and women, the class lines, right? The bourgeoisie and proletariat still manifesting, race lines, all of these things, right? And that's ultimately what the government wants, because if we are divided against each other, it's all the more easy for us to be controlled. But this is why the missing minute of footage with regards to Epstein, why all of the lies are so important. This video breaks it down really well, in my opinion, which I'm going to play for you now. And it actually corrects a mistake that I got wrong before, because I thought the door 46 in the footage that was, released by the DOJ that was edited, right? There's so many things around that. The fact they gave it to a journalist of one of the publications to edit and then splice together or whatever. whatever. In fact, they were so bad, right? There was a frame change. There was all manner of different things. But I actually thought the door that was in question was door 46, and that was the door to Epstein's cell. That wasn't actually right, as this video will correct in a moment. And it will also explain why that missing minute was not only so important, but the fact that something could have gone on in that time based on guard movements and stuff like that, based on the fact that the perspective from the camera seems to be done deliberately. I can't imagine this is the only camera that's located within that. And there's going to be a camera that's directly in line of sight of the thing that's most important that was going on. You would have seen a slight jump cut there, ladies and gentlemen. Here's a video explaining why that missing minute was so important. I am just going to adjust the audio because the audio was clipping. Right, video coming on screen now, ladies and gentlemen.
So let me just get this straight. So we have a guard emerge from the shadows, disappear in the direction of Epstein's cell.
Epstein's door is way back over here in the corner. You can't see it from this footage angle.
60 seconds later, he returns and walks not to check on any other cells, not to make rounds. He walks up the stairs and exits. And that's the footage that was missing, according to officials.
There's just no way that you could have run an op and had people go into that cell and not have any video of it.
This is physically possible to reach his cell and not be picked up on camera. Why would so many people so blatantly lie?
There's just no access points into places like this in the detention center he was in. If they had gotten into the cell, you would see it.
We can't see him from this camera angle, even though if we make the walls transparent, obviously we can see him. But in the raw footage, we'd have no way of knowing if somebody walked this direction.
I've never seen anything like this, and this is scary stuff.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. You wonder why there's no trust there, ladies and gentlemen. So for those of you who are listening, not watching, I'll pull it back up on screen in a moment, but let me just describe what's going on. So the camera that's showing the door of 46 that we saw before is not actually showing Epstein's cell, as I said. I think it was actually showing the entrance to the cell block. But the way the camera is, if you imagine you're looking out over the stairs, down to the left of the perspective of the camera is the stairs, right? You go down those stairs and then you go over to the right, but in that perspective, you get to a point then when you're down on the lower floor, but you walk so far, the wall that is the door to the cell block is on the upper floor actually gets in the way of the camera. So the camera's up on top of the stairs, basically, and you can only see so far in. You can only see so far into the room itself. Now, if you walk beyond that wall, where the wall would stop your vision, you can actually access a staircase that's behind that wall. And if you, again, as CoffeeZilla in this instance, made it very easy to see, if you have a look at this part of the video where, again, you might have to blow it up on your screen to watch this bit, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm going to do a terrible job of articulating it. When he makes the wall transparent, you can clearly see that's where the staircase is, and that's where the body's going. That's where the guard is coming from. Those are the stairs going up to Epstein's room, Epstein's cell. So obviously it would be very easy to go up there within the minute that we saw, rig everything, right? Do a little job, right? Rig everything, and then walk back down. And as you see, he doesn't check any other cell on the block or anything. It doesn't check any other doors. It's just Epstein's cell, seemingly. Now, obviously, could be wrong, but the fact there's been so many lies told about this, there's been so many lies. So again, just to bring it up one more time for you, ladies and gentlemen, again, because I know I've done a terrible job of describing it for those of you who are listening. CoffeeZilla stood by here. This is where the wall gets in the way. Just behind this wall here, where the door is where the cell of the entrance to the cell block where Jeffrey Epstein's located is. And if you make that wall transparent, you then see that camera footage is very, very suspect indeed. So that's why, again, it does seem that there is a cover-up going on, which we've known about time and time again. People have made allegations time and time again. But again, the story's not adding up. The story from Kash Patel, which is why, again, when James Schmidt said that there was conflict going on, it's maybe thinking that maybe Kash doesn't want us to come out for whatever reason. Maybe it's because on directives from Trump or whatever. I don't know. Maybe that's why Dan Bongino, thinking back to that interview that he gave before, Dan Bongino, at least from what I can remember, seemed to be under a lot more stress. Than Kash Patel when he was saying that Epstein killed himself. I think that's because this weighs heavily more on Dan than it does on Kash, personally. I think Kash this is just the way that I see the situation. Again, I don't know Cash. I don't have anything against him personally, but it seems like he's more okay with going along with this than Dan is. Maybe because Dan obviously made his name in the podcast scene. He had one of the largest podcasts in America. And he was very, very strong on the line that Epstein did not kill himself, that he did not believe Epstein killed himself. And I think because that's weighing on him, because either it's the effect it's going to have on his reputation, maybe his family are going to see him differently. Maybe his family's being threatened behind the scenes. You don't know. Don't know, because the corruption goes fucking deep in these circles, right? So you don't know if his family's being threatened behind the scenes or anything like that. His personal safety's being threatened, all of these things, right? How they're going to ruin him if he decides to say anything or if he decides to stray away from the party, right? But there's a lot more to this than meets the eye, and this is seriously bad. And when they tried to come up with that footage, which you could tell was edited, they tried to make that it was raw footage. You could tell that it was edited, and say that that there's nothing to see here, basically. All the lines, but there's nothing to see here. Certainly makes it think that, no, there is actually some things to see here. You just don't want us to look at it. You just don't want us to know. And you're covering for people that have done horrible things to children. So again, this has been one of the biggest dark stains on the Trump administration that is seemingly so needless, but it makes you wonder, what else is going on? What else is going on that you need to cover for these people? I don't think, personally, still at the moment, that Trump is actually in the Epstein files in any credible capacity with doing heinous things to kids, personally. Because I think the Democrats would have used it. They would have used it in the previous election. But then there is the argument on the other side, because if they would have used it, then they would have had to have opened up and essentially fired the nukes at themselves as well. Maybe they weren't willing to take that risk, because maybe they could have thought they could get him on the other stuff. Maybe they thought they would have got him on the other stuff and they wouldn't need to use it. I do think they would have used it, right, if they had anything. But the argument is there that is credible as well. Well, because the logical next step would have been, well, hang on, what about the allegations against Clinton? What about the allegations against all the others? Right? If they'd only come out with the Trump stuff, there would have been a lot more questions and a lot more scrutiny, and it might not have gone their way purely because they would have said, well, hang on, you were just using it as a political football. Now, and God knows what would have happened. But maybe they didn't want to take that risk because they would have had to open up the can of worms on themselves. I don't know. Ultimately, the people just want to know. People like me, again, do we need radical 100% transparency, right? Because no, we don't need to see the footage and anything like that, right? Nobody wants to see that, obviously. But we want to know that justice is done for the victims. And just so we know that good has been done. Good has finally won, because good will win in the end, obviously, but finally that good has been done and people have been willing to take the risk to do it. This is truly awful. If you enjoyed that clip, then make sure to go on over to the Voice of the Valleys X page at VOT_Valleys on X. We're also on Instagram at Voice of the Valleys. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Godspeed.